Welcome back to the show. So, as I was just saying, Governor Hogan held a press conference today at 11, and there's a lot of economic relief that I think is trying to get to the pockets of those people who need it the most. And all of this is, of course, because of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the quickest way to deal with the pandemic relief would be to reopen everything. Now, we know that that's not a possibility. We still have a virus out there. Although we have a vaccine, it hasn't gotten to everyone. So we have to take mitigating steps. But if some of the steps that we've taken gone too far? Well, I think if you ask a lot of those people who were lost their jobs or are losing their businesses, the answer might be yes. It also the question also comes to mind when we talk about schools. We've seen now enough science, enough data that has come out regarding schools and students and what happens when we try to go strictly to a virtual learning kind of a pace. It's just not working. But ultimately, we have to look at the science, right? So what does it say? Well, joining me now is Margery Smelkinson, who is an immunology and infectious disease expert. And Margery, thanks so much for joining me. You had this really interesting op-ed in the Baltimore Sun that's entitled Mandate Masks, Not Metrics to Reopen Maryland Schools. Tell me, what is that about?
Hi, thanks for having me on. Basically, the op-ed is about opening schools, and they should be open with basic precautions. And by basic precautions, I'm really just talking about masks, distancing, hand hygiene, stuff like that we're all used to these days, and that has really been shown to curb the spread in schools. We've been dealing with this for a while. And since the spring, scientists and health officials have been collecting the data and looking at what's happening in the schools. And the consensus is that schools are not these hotspots of viral spread that they thought they were going to be, and that really school closures do little to curb spread in the community.
So then what do you think should be done in place? And do you think that it makes any sense that there have been a lot of private schools that have remained open in Maryland, but a lot of public schools? Is it safe to reopen to at least some hybrid capacity for in-person learning?
Yes. I mean, there's lots of data showing the efficacy of these mitigation measures on their own. Like, so, for example, masking. The Mayo Clinic and the University of Edinburgh both conducted independent experiments showing that simply masking, cloth or disposable, the ones that we're so used to using all the time, you don't need anything fancy, they're able to reduce exposure to respiratory droplets by over 99%. And respiratory droplets are the primary way of spreading COVID. There's also studies from Harvard showing that simply cracking windows can move the air around enough to reduce the viral particles. We know all these things are working because it's also working against other respiratory viruses. So, for example, the flu is significantly reduced this year, which scientists are attributing to these measures that we have in place for COVID. And like you said, in comparison to private schools, our private schools are open around the country. I mean, Maryland is actually... A lot of states have opened their schools. Maryland is sadly not one of them, and it's becoming more of an outlier in that it is offering the least amount of live instruction to their public school students. And that's despite all these calls from public health officials, including Dr. Fauci, urging schools to reopen. And so we are stuck with education becoming sort of a luxury item in Maryland. If you can afford to go to private school, those that can do it will, and those are the ones that are open. And, private schools aren't anything special. I actually, in my article, I made the comparison to Catholic schools because Catholic schools, which are open, they have very, very similar budgets, even smaller budgets than some of the public schools, and their facilities are very similar, and class sizes are very similar, and they've been opening just fine. There's been minimal reports of transmission within the school.
So my guest now is Margery Smelkinson, who's an immunology and infectious disease expert. And one of the things that I deal with here on the radio station, I get to talk to a lot of different politicians and a lot of different, political experts. And it seems like we're following very inconsistent metrics. One jurisdiction may say this, and another jurisdiction says that. In New York, it depends on, I think theirs was 3% positivity rate. Why are there such inconsistent measurements, and should we be adhering strictly to them, or